Hello and welcome to our report direct from the European Parliament here in Strasbourg. This penultimate plenary session of Parliament before the European elections was a very busy one. Amongst others, the following important topics were covered. Better regulation of financial institutions driven by the EPP-ED Group. More competition and rights for consumers in electricity and gas markets. Strengthened nuclear safety rules. Patients' rights to receive treatments anywhere in the EU. As soon as the financial crisis crossed the Atlantic last autumn, European Union members sprang into action to tackle the issue. From the very beginning, the EPP-ED Group emphasised the lack of appropriate regulation of markets. It is the driving force behind a series of reports adopted in Parliament that aim to better regulate and monitor the financial sector.
One of the most important measures proposed by the group is a regulation on credit rating agencies that will improve the process of issuing credit ratings by increasing transparency, avoiding conflicts of interest, and ensuring better methodologies are used by rating agencies. It will also put in place an effective surveillance regime whereby European regulators will supervise credit rating agencies, standardising monitoring across the EU. A lack of sound regulation of these agencies, due to Liberals' idea of self-regulated markets, allowed them to underestimate the credit risk of structured credit products such as subprime mortgages in the United States, exposing banking and credit institutions to huge losses. EPP-ED member Jean-Paul Gauzès, responsible for the report, underlined the importance of the legislation adopted.
I think that in this way the European Parliament, the Commission and the Presidency of the Council will have proved that, faced with a crisis of an unprecedented scale, the institutions were able to react swiftly. I hope that the other provisions in the financial package, notably the recast of the Capital Requirements Directive, also known as Basel II, can be adopted in the same spirit. During this period, in which Europeans are questioning the effectiveness of the European Union, it seems to me essential that we prove that Europe can confront the crisis head-on.
Following the adoption of the legislation, credit rating agencies will have to comply with the rigorous rules, forcing them to be transparent and accountable for their evaluations and decisions. Another important report on capital requirements for banks, drafted by EPP-ED Vice Chairman Otmar Karas, will be voted on during May's plenary session. In another debate on the outcome of the G20 summit last month in London, Joseph Daul, Group Chairman, applauded the agreement and criticised the socialist way of dealing with the crisis. My colleagues of the left are calling for more public spending and more social security. They want to supposedly protect jobs while closing our economies. A transparent economy that will enable everyone to use their skills. A sustainable and innovative economy. We must have a social market economy. One of the main problems in the financial sector was the lack of financial regulation and monitoring.
The integration of European gas and electricity markets will be eased when Member States implement new rules approved this week in Strasbourg. The so-called Third Energy Package proposes legislation to introduce more competition in the sector. It requires ownership unbundling, a process which prevents a monopoly of the market by separating ownership of energy production and supply facilities from ownership of transmission networks. The package will improve consumer rights. Parliament also debated a directive on nuclear safety.
The EPP-ED Group has played a leading role over the past couple of years in tough negotiations to reach an agreement on liberalising electricity and gas markets in an attempt to supply cheaper energy to European consumers. Spanish MEP Alejo Vidal-Quadras, who was responsible for the legislation on conditions for access to electricity networks, said that, although the new rules are not perfect, Parliament can be proud of the results.
Indeed, our very strong first reading agreement on ownership unbundling gave the negotiation team a lot of leverage during the talks, and this has allowed us to obtain a much tighter regulatory framework, in particular in countries with the ITO model in place, where the competences of national regulators will be increased competences and independence from both governments and industry. This new role will reduce the risk of uncompetitive behaviour, especially under circumstances where vertically integrated companies abuse their position to stop investments in new capacity.
The energy package provides consumers with the right to switch their electricity or gas supplier within 3 weeks and free of charge. It also allows them to choose between different payment methods and to receive more information on their rights, their bills, and on the environmental impact of their energy supply. They will also have increased rights to claim compensation and to benefit from a more efficient complaint system if service quality levels are not met. An EU agency for cooperation of the energy regulators will be set up to monitor the market. Giles Chichester, the MEP responsible for the regulation, said that even if the agency does not have all the appropriate powers to act, it is a step in the right direction.
I believe that monitoring internal markets in gas and electricity, participating in the development of network codes, contributing to the implementation of the guidelines on trans-European energy networks, monitoring progress on implementation of projects to create new interconnector capacity, the power to decide on exemptions from requirements for investments in infrastructure, monitoring implementation of the 10-year network investment plans, and powers to issue opinions and recommendations to TSOs and others that I don't have the time to enumerate. But I believe all of this will give the agency ample opportunities to bring about change.
Nuclear power is set to increase in importance as Europe tries to reduce both CO2 emissions and its dependence on Russia for energy. 145 nuclear power reactors are currently operating in 15 member states, and nuclear power represents 31% of EU electricity production. Plans for new nuclear power plants are multiplying. A common regulation on nuclear safety is needed, says the European Council, who have presented a directive on a community framework for nuclear safety. Gunnar Hökmark, EPP-ED Vice Chairman responsible for the Parliament response to the directive, spoke in plenary in Strasbourg.
Let's be very frank about this. We will have nuclear power in the future, whatever all of us here today agree about in this issue. And I think it is important, and that is my view, that we can lay the ground for having more nuclear power plants. And then they must be credible, and there must exist a credibility in the public opinion, but more important than that, there must be a substantial and real security when we are managing the nuclear power, as there should be in every other thing we do. And the rules of today are good and strong, but we are making them more consistent, and that's a step forward.
If the Council listens to the feedback from Parliament, we will see improvements in nuclear power safety. The report makes the International Atomic Energy Agency principles for security legally binding and makes strong and independent national regulators compulsory in all member states.
At the beginning of the month, we brought you a report on patients' rights to receive healthcare abroad. The proposal has now been adopted by Parliament. Philip Bushill-Matthews stood in for the original author of the report, UK MEP John Bowis, who unfortunately was absent following surgery in Brussels. Bushill-Matthews underlined the importance of the new legislation.
John has sought to shed light into what has been a very murky area, to bring clarity where uncertainty prevailed before, always based on the twin principles that the patient must always come first and that patient choice should be determined by needs and not by means. For the last 10 years, European citizens have been going to the courts to fight for their right to go to another member state for treatment. It is clear that patients want this right, that they deserve this right, and are entitled to this right.
This programme was brought to you by the press service of the EPP-ED Group. For a more extensive version of the report, visit our website, epp-ed.eu. Thanks for watching, and see you again soon.